Welcome to another edition of the Stewardship Coach. I'm Mark Brooks, and I am the Stewardship Coach, and I'm excited to have you as a part of this special edition where we're going to talk about some pivotal things to help you increase generosity in your church. I'm the founder of Acts 17 Generosity, and you can find out more about that. If you want to, you can email me at mark@acts17generosity.com. As I always say, that's the most important thing on the screen that you're going to see. You can get direct access to all of my materials. Just simply email me. I do answer my emails, mark@acts17generosity.com. And then another great way to follow me to stay abreast of all that I write and I produce is by following me on Twitter. I'm Stewardship Man, capital S, capital M, on Twitter, and that way you can stay abreast of all the various things that I write. If I post for another company or for things like that, I'm always clicking into my Twitter feed. So it's a great way to follow what I offer for you, the church, and for others who are just interested in the whole topic of generosity and how to increase generosity. And speaking of topics, I'll get into what we're going to talk about today, which I think is a very important, timely topic for any church. And what we're going to be talking about is what I call the 50% line and the over-under split. Now, you're going to see how these two relate as we walk through this, and I'll explain all of that. And so as we talk through that, we're going to look at what I call the power of the few. We're going to discover an old adage is true. And then secondly, we're going to look at how the top is aging. And this is where your over-under split comes in. Why this should concern you as a Christian leader, and then what can you do about it? I'm going to give you just some practical ideas and tips. And then for those of you who are members at the end, we have a question and answer time, which is one of the benefits of becoming a member of the Stewardship Coach platform, because you're going to get that ability in our group teaching time to be able to ask any questions that you have related to any topic around generosity. Don't ask me, who's going to win the World Series or the Super Bowl, all that. You don't care my opinion. But when it comes to generosity, I can help you. And that's one of the values for members, is they can come here week to week to week and know that they can get their questions answered. So let's dive into what sort of brought me to this point. I got an email from a client. It's been about a year or so ago. And give you the upshot of it, he was wanting to know about his giving data. One of the things that I've done for years and years and years, 20 plus years, one of the pioneers in the financial analysis, to take data of giving in churches and then track out what does that mean for you. Not just in a capital campaign, but what does that mean for what your giving might be in the next year, those kinds of things. And so having done that and having done this for this client, he came back to me and he said, listen, here's my problem. He said, my question is, our giving ratio for those under 50, how does that look like to you? So here's what he said. We've got 46 giving units. That's what that GU stands for if you're reading the screen, under 50. They gave $158,000. The average gift is $3,400, but the median gift is $1,500. How does this group compare with others in your experience? Now, here's the pivotal question that he's asking, and not maybe in the way that I'm going to lay this out, but he's wanting to know, is my giving trends normal? Should I be concerned? And I'm going to walk you through what I think is the right answer for all of us, not just in this instance, but I wanted to give you an example of how one is talking to me about what this looks like. And so I call it the power of the few. And a few years ago, I took some data from a variety of churches that I worked with. And you're going to see there's all across the board. I've got a church that I'm tracking with now, and their budget's it's about 22 million to 23 million now. I've tracked churches with really larger even budgets than that. But this is the group of churches that currently we were working with, either myself or some of my other associates. And you can see as you walk through the different strata, and maybe you'll find yourself on there, a lot of different variants in terms of all the way from 539 up to the 20 million, different denominations, culturally different, even non-denominational churches in that mix. And here's what we found. On average, in any church, 15% of their donors gives half of all that is given. Now, when you get up in the upper tiers of the super mega churches, it falls below 10%. And sometimes when you get in really smaller churches, it might get to 20%. You're going to see that in a screenshot here in just a minute. But on average, most churches, around 15% of their donors give half of all that's given. And so here's a couple of screenshots just to kind of give you an example of what we're talking about when we look at that. So here's a church with a $1.6 million budget in the year that we looked at this, and you can see 47 people, or 9.9% of their donor base, gave half. Now, the next one is a little bit smaller, 739. If you go all the way to the bottom, 39 people, or remarkably, 15.5%, gave half of all that's given. Now, here's a smaller church at $279,000 in the calendar year, and 20 people, or 19.6%. So in the smaller you get, typically it gets closer, between 15 to 20%. If you get beyond $1 million and upwards, then the average is about 10 to 15. The average is about 15. So I always say this, that half of your donors give half of all that's given. And we might freak out about that and say, well, you know, that's terrible, but it really is what I call the power of the few. And it is a truism that we've known for years. The few always give the majority in any church setting. And so my question is always this, back to the initial email that was sent to me: how many of your donors in this list, if you were to list out your donors, how many of your donors are below 50? How many of them are above 50? And that's what we call the over-under split. So there's two things as a church leader that you want to analyze particularly. You want to look at, where is your 50% line at? My guess is that it's going to be around 15%. Just recently was with a church. It's about a $500,000 budget, and as we walked through it, 18 families had given half, and that was like 13 point some odd percentage, but it was right around the 15% mark. And so as I shared with that church, I said, tell me where these people are, and I'll tell you a lot about the potential that you have as we move forward with the project that we're talking about. And one of the things that we know is we have to address this issue, because here's what we've got to understand. Right now, every baby boomer in America is 50 plus. And not several years ago, I spoke at a church, and they were in St. Clair County was where they were at. And so I looked up school salaries in that county, and I discovered that a school teacher, an elementary school teacher, was making $88,499. So, you know, that's not a bad, you know, amount to be making as a school teacher. And in this church, they were a tithing emphasis church. So let's say that this lady is tithing. That means $8,850 comes to that church every year because she's tithing 10%. In the state that she lives in, she's been working for 30 years in the school system. She's above 50 years of age. She can retire at 75% of her top income. So I'm going to tell you something. At 62, she's tired of chasing fourth graders up and down the hall. She retires. She decides to retire. She moves from $88,000 to $66,000. Her house is paid for, cars paid for, all of those kinds of things. She can live on that, but she's still a tither. She's going to tithe less on what she makes, $6,637. That means that church would take a 25% hit to their bottom line. And my question for you is, can you afford that kind of hit as you move forward? Another one of my clients sent me this pie chart. Now, let me give you a little bit of background. This is a denominational church. They're kind of a blue collar church, $1.5 million budget. So it's good attendance. It's very solid. It's got a solid financial base. And yet when you look at this, what is amazing is that 84% of all the dollars given at this church, or 1.3 million of the 1.5, comes from individuals who are 50 and up. So only 200,000 comes from those under 50. What's amazing is 60% of their attendance is under 40 years of age. And so the staff member sends me this, and he says, I've discovered that we've got a problem. Now, his bigger problem was he can't get his senior pastor to get his hands around this because the senior pastor thinks the staff member's just being negative all the time. Guys, can I tell you that I could walk into almost any church in America and see exactly this kind of pie chart being played out in church after church after church after church. And we are not paying attention to the generational shift in giving and how that's going to impact you and your church. If you just do nothing, you're going to find, like that previous slide that I showed, that as this generation moves into retirement, their generosity hasn't waned, but their income has diminished, which means their ability to give to you anything. And I'm just not talking about a campaign. I'm talking about week to week to week. Their ability is diminished. And so one of our struggles is this, that younger generations starting out in their careers are making significantly less than their grandparents and parents made starting at the same time. In fact, this chart, which is kind of crazy, but it shows that younger people under 35 have a greater propensity to living in the poverty level than those who are older. So here's my question. What can we do about this? And the first is this: know your giving trends. You don't walk into the future unaware of what your giving trends are. And then what I always say is act sooner rather than later. The longer you kick this can down the road, the harder it's going to be to change this. I always say this: we didn't get into this problem overnight, and we're not going to get out overnight. And yet, if we do nothing, we will be in further and further difficulty as we move forward. And I do what I call a front end and a back end strategy. And when I talk about that, what I'm meaning is I want to find an ability on the front end. How do we engage people? And so I want to create a positive culture of generosity. Guys, it is not that we talk about money that drives people away. If that were true, no charity would ever get any money. Nobody complains about the Red Cross, the American Cancer Society, when they ask for money. It's how we have asked for it that has typically turned people off. And my passion is to change the conversation about generosity. And what we've got to do is show the value of how giving to your church makes a difference. When you show people that $1 given at your church changes lives, they're more apt to give and give with a joyful heart. And so what we have to do is teach stewardship as a lifestyle. And by that, I mean, we've got to be putting in financial peace, helping our younger generations know how to manage their funds, how to get out of debt. You've got people who are so in debt, they can't afford to do anything. And then you get up and talk about giving, and it's just something that they can't meet. So let's get them out of debt. Let's help people understand as a Christian what it means to live a lifestyle that doesn't mean that we're in poverty, but eating beans and cornbread, so to speak. But we need to understand that it doesn't mean we've got to have a new car every time one comes out or the new iPhone. So the other thing I always say is you need to have a robust first-time giver plan. Because when someone gives the first time, that is the entryway into the life of generosity. Don't let them just stand at the doorway and then turn around and walk away. Help them understand that walking fully into that door opens up just a lifetime of joy and blessing, and yet and also their lives can be a blessing for others. So, and the other thing, keep at it. You have to have a strategy, you have to have a plan, and you have to implement that plan week in and week out. It's why a few years ago I founded an organization that later sold called Giving 365, because I would tell my clients, we've got to think about this 365 days a year. Now, I know you're busy, and so that's where your coach comes in, and I help you think about that. And so that's the value of being a member of the Stewardship Coach platform, because all of the tools that we have, we provide for you, like a first-time giving plan. But you've got to have a front-end strategy, because we have, as we look at those charts, you know that your top-end donor base is aging. And if we don't replace them with the generations coming up, we're going to have a very difficult time staying fully funded. Let's talk about back-end strategy. One of the things is this: build the relationships that you need with your top 50%. If you're a pastor, I think they ought to be on your speed dial, and in turn, their number, your number ought to be on their speed dial. I'm not saying placate the wealthy or show favoritism to the wealthy. That's not at all what I mean. But I do mean that you need to establish a solid relationship with this group of people so that you're ministering to them, but you're also sharing your heart and vision with them so that their heart is knitted with your heart, which I'm trusting is knitted with the heart of God. And so when we spend time with that donor group, we make sure that they will stay with us all the way until God calls them home. And so one of the key advices, if you will, from one of the leading groups of nonprofits in America today is this: keep what you currently have in terms of that 50 plus generation. So that's something that I think is very, very important for us to do that. I think it's important that you thank this group continually. I've always said this, that a thank you is the best appeal for the next gift. And when you thank people for their generosity, it just sets the stage for the next ask. And then what we've got to do is help people to understand that what they have to do and are called by God as a disciple is to leave a legacy behind. And so we're spending a lot of time in my coaching with my clients, particularly with this back-end strategy of helping them understand how important it is to build out an estate plan so that your church can be funded into the future with saints that perhaps have gone on to be with the Lord, but because they wrote you in the will, you're left behind with some sense or means to be able to continue on the legacy of their life. To give you a good illustration, I had a small Methodist church several years ago in a small town in Virginia that had a very large project. They could have never been able to tackle that, would have never even dreamed to start it, and yet they had a $700,000 bequest, unknown to them, by the way, come into their church because a longtime member had passed and left them in their will. Now, wonder how many people you have that if you were to give them that opportunity or even the thought that they could leave behind a legacy to your church, that might seed into your vision. Maybe 5 years from now, 10 years from now, should the Lord tarry, then it could be one of those kinds of gifts that could make all the difference in the world, whether or not you will be able to do that project, do that initiative, that ministry, which God was calling you to do. So think about this with two strategies: front end, back end, but it comes and starts with really an awareness of what is your numbers and how do you need to address that numbers. My guess is, like most churches I look at, that your 50% line will prove to you that the few always give the majority, and also it will show you that the age demographic is shifting greatly, and if we don't take some action today, we're going to be in trouble in less than a decade. Well, one of the things I also want to share with you is that my manual, the Successful Easter Giving Plan, is available now. If you'd like to have more information about that, just email me. My email is mark@acts17generosity.com. By the way, if you are a member of the Stewardship Coach platform, you're going to get this free if you'll ask me, or if you just go to the site, you can log in. And all of that material is there free for you to download. So we're going to move then to our time of question. But for those of you who are guests with us in this special webinar, again, remind you how to follow me. It's on Twitter, Stewardship Man. And then here's my email address, mark@acts17 generosity. That's the wrong email address there. mark@acts17generosity.com is my email. I'm the Stewardship Coach. I'd love to be sharing and talking with you. And for those of you who are members, hang with us. We're going to have our normal question and answer time and our group teaching time. For the rest of you, thanks for attending and listening to this session of the Stewardship Coach. I look forward to sharing with you more information as we continue in this series of helping you be fully funded in your church. Thank you and God bless.